Thank you, sir. Stage is yours. Well, listen, I want to start by saying thanks to Eric for giving up some stage time to me. I think Eric is doing a terrific job monitoring. Agreed? Yes. Big round of applause for Eric. I think he's doing a great job. I hope he's here to hear that. And I want to introduce our panels because we only have 20 minutes and we've got a lot of ground to cover with these guys and great insights that will come from them. So please welcome David Flynn, who's the CEO of Primary Data, and Jeff Rothschild is the VP of Infrastructure Engineering at Facebook. Gentlemen, welcome. And this would be David, and this would be Jeff. Hi guys, how are you? Good. Very good. So we're talking about how big data changes everything. Really, we're talking about how the world of enterprise IT is changing right now. When you look at the demands on compute, storage, networking, everything really needs to change because of a lot of forces going on in the market, and I want to talk to you about those. We were talking backstage. I think enterprise IT right now is in a very difficult situation. If you're a startup, you would never build what enterprise IT is operating today. And if you're a cloud provider or you're someone operating at the scale of a Facebook or a Google or operation like that, you would never build what enterprise IT. You're going in completely new directions that have a big impact on how the industry will be shaped and the future of computing will be shaped. So I want to explore that and talk about what that means for folks. So let's talk about that. How is the underlying computing architecture changing in the enterprise, and what are the big forces driving that? I'll let you guys tackle that first.
So I think what we're seeing is that computing is being used for, broadly speaking, a new class of problems. And I've heard it termed systems of engagement versus systems of record. Computing in the past has been used to keep track of bank accounts and your flight bookings and whatnot, things that have to be precise to the record. But with big data, I think the biggest way to think about it is these are systems that engage us in the ability to mine knowledge from raw data and information. So they become more about what we can learn from the data. It's unstructured, it's less precise, it doesn't need to be strictly coherent, so it's loosely coherent, but it's a huge volume of data that has to be accessed very quickly. So new methods are being developed for how you process that, like MapReduce, etc. And that puts a wholly different requirement on the infrastructure. And in particular, it leads away from the scale up of hero systems that have to be very beefy and have to be mission critical and are using commercial software to more scale out, loosely coupled, open software, because it doesn't have to be as accurate as your bank account balance does. So I think that's one aspect to it, is the scale out of less mission critical versus the scale up of highly mission critical systems. And that's the difference between systems of record and systems of engagement.
So in your viewpoint, though, it's really that data usage that's driving those changes.
Absolutely. It's all about the data. The infrastructure is there to support it. That's what people want to get at.
But it may be difficult to assume that things would start at internet scale, eventually will work their way into the enterprise. Because enterprise works with a different set of requirements. And people on the outside of enterprise often thumb their nose at what happens in enterprise computing and say, well, that's the way they did it 20 years ago.
Right.
But there can be very good reasons why that's the case. So let's look at this subject that we call big data. First of all, I'm not sure big is actually the right adjective to describe what's really happened in data analytics. Big certainly is appropriate description of what happens in internet scale businesses. You've got millions of users, each user potentially having hundreds to thousands of interactions with the website, resulting in lots of data. And there's tremendous value to be gleaned from understanding that data. Great value for the enterprise, for the business. But the actual value density of that data is quite low. And so per unit of storage, the dollar value of the insights you gain is relatively low. So that economic constraint really has defined the technologies that have been developed over the last 10 years for internet scale infrastructure, systems like Hadoop, or the MapReduce systems at Google, those were driven by the sheer volume of data and the amount of data that needed to be processed in order to gain the necessary insight. In enterprise, we're looking at typically transactional data, lower absolute scale, but possibly and most likely much higher volume per unit of storage, so much greater value density. And hence the technologies that have been developed within the internet scale community aren't necessarily the most appropriate here.
So David talked about this as he moving to a scale out versus scale up.
Yeah, I think of scale up as, you know, big storage arrays from the commercial vendors. In a sense, when what you need to do is to be able to feed enough data into the processors to get the answers. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're doing. But in the enterprise, where systems are mission critical because of the high value density of the information, you're often using commercial software. That's one of the biggest defining differences, is the use of commercial software where you have somebody whose throat you can choke versus open source software. You have to go open source to be able to do the kind of scale at the low information density that Jeff was talking about.
Yeah.
So if you're using commercial software, then you have the further problem of you don't want those licenses to go underutilized. So you beef up the amount of memory in the system. You beef up the storage array, and you scale it to get the full value of that software license. Whereas in the internet scale, you just scale out very cheap commodity units, and it doesn't matter there the licensing cost. So I think a big driver behind the scale up versus scale out pivot is the use of commercial software and the licensing model. It's better to pay EMC more to buy a beefy storage system to make sure your Oracle license aren't underutilized. Is a way to think about it.
So Jeff, I understand some that they call you J-Ro. Am I allowed to call you J-Ro?